I'm Scott Malevsky, and this is Interviews with Me.
Oh, Maine, your rivers, your back roads claim me.
This week, Dan Wathan.
If you see something that you think you might want to do, go for it. Don't spend too much time wringing your hands over it one way or the other. If it's right, it's right.
Welcome home to Maine.
My next guest is from a small town in northern Maine called Easton. After graduating high school, he went on to become a lawyer and then a judge, being appointed to the Maine Superior Court and then the Maine Supreme Court, eventually being selected as Chief Justice. Having served under 4 governors, he resigned from the bench in 2001 to run unsuccessfully for governor. Since that time, he has joined the law firm of Pierce Atwood, where he serves as an arbitrator and mediator in cases around Maine and the country. In addition, he teaches undergraduate courses at the University of Maine in Augusta, is a member of multiple bar associations, multiple boards, and currently serves as the board chair of the Maine Turnpike Authority. Please welcome Dan Wathan. Mr. Wathan, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about Easton. Tell me about growing up in Easton.
Well, Easton is a small farming community of 1,200 people, and it's always been roughly 1,200 people. Today, it has a large potato processing plant owned by McCain's and a large particle board mill owned by Uber Corporation. Particle board mill was previously a sugar beet refinery, which was played a fair role in my legal career. But in any event, that's the village. My father was a Canadian who became naturalized, basically bought and sold potatoes in Easton for a number of years, then eventually went to work for Volsing at the potato processing plant when it was first started. And my mother came from Washburn or Perham, which no one knows where Perham is, but the end of the earth. She came from Perham. They settled in Easton, and my mother off and on worked in a variety of things. For a while during World War II, we had farms. My father never really cared to work on a farm, and so my mother ran the farms in World War II, and she worked pretty much most of her life one way or another, potatoes. For example, when I was in law school, she worked in a potato house packing potatoes to support me. So it was sort of working class family and very, very nice community. Everybody in town knew what you were doing. So,
I grew up in a small town. I know that.
Yeah. So you couldn't get away with much. And
How many siblings did you have?
I had one older brother. He was about 11 years older than I was. He was so much older than I that he went to a private high school when he was a junior, and so he and I never really lived together. So he was sort of the summer. He would return for the summer. He was either in the high school or the Army for a while, and then college, and he also went to law school. So he was sort of my hero growing up.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up on the farm.
Not really. We never lived on a farm except for 2 or 3 years. Most of the time we lived in the village of Easton, and when we had farms, we didn't live on them. They were off in the pucker brush out of Easton.
But I assume you got put to work on the farm for a little bit.
Yeah. You had to hide in the summertime in order to avoid being hired to do some lousy job like picking potatoes or picking rocks or pulling mustard. Or the worst thing you could get hired for was to be haying with, some farmer would hire you. His daughter would run the tractor outside to haul the hay up into the barn, and they'd put you up in the peak of the barn, hotter than a cannon. There's chaff down your neck, mowing the hay away. So those are the days you sort of hung back and stayed off the main street.
What's your favorite memory of growing up as a kid that you go back to?
My favorite memory is just the whole town of Easton. Everybody, knew everything about them. There were no secrets. Social controls were heavy because, if you did anything, they'd make fun of you. And everybody had a nickname, which was sort of a derogatory name. So it was just a great community, very supportive. I became, I needed a lot of support during my high school years. I was bit of a rebel during those years.
So what was your nickname growing up?
Mine was all, well, I hate to say this because it used to make me so damn mad, but my teeth are separated in front, and there was a bunch of them called me Bugs Bunny.
Jeez. Yeah, that kind of sticks with you, doesn't it?
Yeah. Fortunately, most of those guys died off, and so
so you don't have to worry about it anymore.
I haven't been called that for a long time.
Small towns you have those memories like that.
Right.
That's good. Did you have any favorite people in the town growing up?
Oh, yeah. There was a guy named Chip Dodge who ran the filling station right across the street from my house. He was the confidant of every young boy growing up in Easton. We would go in and talk to him, and he was interested in what you were doing. And after I was in college and law school and practice, he would continue to write me letters. They were always very humorous letters. But Chip was a great influence on every young boy. And to give you an example of how he would operate, first time I got into having a little beer, which was when I was in high school, I got in trouble with my mother. And Chip, when I was talking to him, he quietly said to me one day, "You know, Dan," he said, "I've done a lot of raising hell in my life, and I've discovered that whether you get into trouble or not, it depends on who you're running around with, who you're hanging around with," which was just a way of telling me you're in the wrong crowd, you know. But it sunk in, and it registered with me. It
means something coming from someone.
Yeah, and he
like
gave
that.
me some examples, and so, but Chip did that with every boy, and every boy he wrote to for years after. He was a great influence. The other people and teachers I remember I really had no difficulty in getting A's all through grade school until I hit the 8th grade, and there was a teacher named Verna Fuller, and we called her Bulldog Fuller, and she was the first one who actually insisted that you do some work and gave me my first B's and C's and that sort of thing. But she was, without a doubt, the best teacher that I ever had, even though I struggled to keep up.
On the flip side of that, were there any people that you avoided?
No, not in Easton. You couldn't avoid anyone.
How do you describe a perfect day when you were a kid?
Oh,
other than haying.
Yeah, no. The perfect days would be, in the summertime, we would spend most of the day down at there's a pool pond right in the middle of town. Just the brook is dammed up there. So we would spend all day, on a nice day, we'd spend all day down there swimming, including into the night. It was just a place to hang out. Mm-hmm. In the wintertime, we would do pretty much the same thing with ice skating on that same pond. And the pond was only 300 yards from my house. And it was the gathering spot in town.
Who were your heroes growing up? Were they people in the town, or were they, heroes on the movie screen? I don't even know if Easton had a movie screen.
Yeah, we didn't, but they had one in Presque Isle.
Yep.
It's been so long. I know my older brother was always, a role model for me. Oh, I can remember now. I was influenced and enthralled by a movie that I saw with Marlon Brando called The Wild Ones, which was a motorcycle gang taking over California.
That kind of stuck with you.
It kind of stuck with me.
You've talked about, riding with Gary Crocker and Angus King, and Maine has its own version of the Wild Ones, right?
Well, we call ourselves the Mild Ones.
The Mild Ones. You mentioned a little bit about getting in trouble when you were in high school. What's the worst thing you did growing up?
I was defiant. I didn't deal well with authority in high school, which is a little strange for somebody who was going to become a Chief Justice, but I didn't do that. And so I think I would sort of defy some teachers, not all. Some of them I liked very much, and some of them wouldn't allow me to get away with that, but some did. And so I was suspended from school a lot. And usually it was, by that time I had a motorcycle. Usually it was on a nice day when I'd ride out of the school. And so I'd get suspended sometimes for a day, sometimes for a couple of weeks. I never really did anything terrible. I didn't. I was just, if you told me Dan, you can do anything except you can't walk on that side of the gymnasium. I would go and walk on that side of the gymnasium. There was a movie at the same time, Rebel Without a Cause, with James Dean. And I, looking back on it, I was a rebel without a cause. You know?
Gained a bit of a reputation with the teachers in high school.
Yeah, well, at the same time, they would say, Dan, you have, and my grades went totally to pieces in high school. I always say I tried to get a gentleman's C, and I could do it without ever opening a book. Jokingly, I would say, and it's not easy to maintain a C grade because somebody will give you a B and ruin your academic record. But I did manage to have a C. I had to take French 3 years to get 2 years of it, But they always said, but you have great promise, Dan. Just apply yourself. I didn't want to apply myself.
You didn't want to apply.
No. So I graduated 16th out of a class of 17. And the 17th guy, I don't think he got a diploma. I'm not sure. But I was president of the class.
But you did graduate.
I did graduate, and I could take standardized tests, so I would come out very high on the SATs. I was admitted to University of Maine. Didn't change my view in any way, and so I flunked out of University of Maine. And I went to Ricker College, and I didn't really flunk out. Well, I don't know. I guess I would have flunked out. After a semester, I just never finished any courses except art appreciation. One of the report cards that my mother got on European history that said, incomplete, Dan hasn't been seen since Christmas. Appears to be disorganized, perhaps virtuously so. I think he was trying to tell me I was working at it. I don't know.
Let's transition into that a little bit. How did you go from an unmotivated student, which is what I'm hearing, into a, you know what, I want to be a lawyer and I want to be a judge. And I mean, I'm sure Chief Justice was not even a thought at that point.
And even the judge wasn't a thought.
But what makes you do that flip? Was it one moment or was it a series of events? How did that happen?
To be honest, the way it happened, when I left school the second time, I spent a semester in Florida working with an uncle on a used car lot. When it got hot in the spring, I came back to Maine. And one of the virtues of the small town was that every time I ever got suspended school, you always had to go to work. And it was terrible work, working on a farm or a potato house or whatever. So I came back to Maine. The job I immediately got was shoveling rotten potatoes out of a burnt cellar of a potato storage house, which was about as bad as it gets. And so it was in the spring, and my mother said, I had always had a girlfriend, Judy Foran. We'd gone together since I was a freshman, off and on. And so my mother said, are you going back to school this fall? And I said, yeah, I think I will. She said, have you ever thought of getting married? And I was 20 years old by this time. And I said, no, I can't afford to support myself, much less a wife. And she said, well, I just assume support both of you if you do something in school. So 2 weeks later, I got married, and the next year in school, Judy dropped out of school and went to work. She was going to Ricker College at the same time. So the next year, since I was married and at home, I did something I had never done before, which was to actually start reading the textbooks. And it made a tremendous difference. All of a sudden, I'm a Dean's List student. Before, I had sort of tried to establish myself with negative behavior, and now it was very positive. A couple of history teachers took a shine to me, and one of them wanted me to go and get a PhD in history. So she helped me, and I got admitted to Michigan State PhD program with a full boat scholarship. In the spring when I was graduating, my brother, who was a lawyer by that time, came along and said, what, did you ever think of going to law school? And I said, not really. And he said, you ought to. And he said, why don't you apply? And I said, I don't want to go. He said, well, University of Maine is just starting up a law school. Why don't you apply there? And I said, well, I don't have any money. And he said, well, I'll pay for the application. And so that's how I got to law school. And when I went to law school, I was quite leery. Again, I got into law school because I was good at standardized tests. Yep. The dean of the law school, who later was a colleague of mine on the Supreme Court, described that he said when Dan's application came in, it was a close call. He said it appeared that he had done nothing for the first 2.5 years. And then he had experienced some sort of an epiphany. So we went with the epiphany, which was probably the most significant decision in my life, was that decision to go with the epiphany. And when I got into law school, I thought probably I might flunk out again since I had that problem. But I always had the highest score on every thing. Law school was my thing. That I would have stayed in law school the rest of my life if they'd have paid me.
Was it just that you found that you enjoyed law, or that you were good at it?
I just sort of had an intuitive understanding of a lot of it, and I was good at it. I enjoyed it, and came easy to me, and I could spend a lot of time on working on it. I worked very hard in law school, and then I became the editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and usually you do that in your third year. I did it for 2 years, the second and third year, which adds a lot of work to the law school. And so I worked really hard, but I loved it. I just, it was just my kind of stuff. I've always sort of had a quick, intuitive take on things, which can be wrong at times.
Sure.
And you learn to test it, but just intuitively I understand the concepts and that sort of thing. It was obviously what I should have been doing all along.
Now, have you learned to be intuitive about situations, or the law in general, or people, or a combination thereof?
I think I'm a pretty good judge of persons and have good people skills, and I attribute that to growing up in a small town where you work with everybody, and know 2 or 3 generations of every family.
You kind of have to interact with everybody.
You have to interact, and you have to learn how to do it. And so I think I had that, and that's really important no matter what you do. I just had this sort of intuitive grasp of a lot of legal concepts that came easy to me. That's remained true throughout my career, fortunately.
When you went back to school and you worked your way through school, and did your mother and father finally say, "See, we knew there was a student in there somewhere"?
No.
Nothing like that? It wasn't he finally took the challenge or nothing like that? It was just like, finally he's doing something.
My father always was critical of, well, not critical, but he was critical of my mother. He said, you're going to spoil that guy, make him work. If he wants to go to school, make him work. He told the same thing to my brother, and we used to tell him, "Don't worry, Joe." We called him Joe. "When you get old, we'll put you in a nice nursing home."
What's your favorite memory about your father?
Fishing. My father, I said he never worked on the farms because he fished all summer long. He grew up on the Miramichi River, which is a salmon river in New Brunswick, and we fished all summer long. If you've ever seen the movie or read the book, A River Runs Through It, that was my life. Actually thinking about what was my favorite, a perfect day in the summertime, be fishing.
What about your mom? What's your favorite memory about your mother?
Wilda was just solid. So my memory of her is that she was always a source of comfort. So even if you were in trouble, you didn't have to be concerned about she would be with you.
She's always there.
Yeah, she was always there. Critical at times.
Sure.
She was, and when I get kicked out of school, high school, she would go up and tell the principal, I don't care what you do with him. I mean, you can beat him. You can beat him if you want to, but you can't keep him out of school.
He's more trouble when he's out of school.
Yeah, he's got to stay in school. And so they would let me back in.
Going back to law school and graduating from law school, how did that transition happen? You went from law school, you graduated, then you started to obviously practice to become a lawyer. Right. How do you go from lawyer to Supreme Court justice?
Pretty much by accident. I really didn't. None of it has ever been planned. The only thing I ever planned, and I only did it for 2 or 3 days, was my brief run as governor, which lasted 7 weeks. And after 7 weeks, I said, I don't want to do this.
That was enough.
And I will never plan anything again. I didn't plan, it's sort of an accident how I went to law school. And when I got out of law school, my brother was in practice here in Augusta, my older brother. And so I came. I had other opportunities in Portland, but I came here and started practicing in Augusta with him. He'd been ahead of me, and so we became quite successful.
Junior partner?
Well, actually, it started out there were 5 or 6 of us in the firm, and I was really junior at that point. But eventually, he and I peeled off and just went on our own. And even though he was 11 years older than I was, we were sort of equal partners. We practiced together was the most satisfying way that we've ever done because we were both complemented each other. He's very outgoing and was a good person with, I guess in legal circles they call it rainmaker. He would bring in a lot of clients, and he was good at work, but I was a bit better, and we could swap back and forth. So that was it. The problem with that was that after about 5 or 6 years of practicing together, he died of a stroke at age 41. So all of a sudden I had the whole practice by myself, which made me even more successful at a young age.
Because you had to be.
Because I had to be. So by the time I was 37, I'd been practicing for 12 years, basically 6 since his death. And we had 5 or 6 people in the firm, at my firm at that point. You know, I had done a lot of trial work. I'd done a lot of transactional work. And I was beginning to wonder, how am I going to last, you know, to get through to 65 or whatever it is. The success almost can ruin you at that stage. So I went down one day to the State House to sit as a member of a board that I was on, sort of a judicial kind of a board. Employees Appeals Board, it was called. And as I walked through the State House, Governor Longley's chief of staff, who was a lawyer that I knew, a young guy, he said, if the governor would appoint you to the Superior Court, would you be interested in it? And I was 37 years old, had young kids. The job didn't pay much at that point. It paid about 1/5 of what I was making. Just quickly, I thought, well, I'd like to be a judge sometime. I figured it would lead to an interview or something, you know. So I said, yeah, I guess I would. I went upstairs to the hearing. About halfway through the afternoon, I got a note that said, when you get a chance, stop by the governor's office. 4 o'clock, I got a note that said, come to the governor's office. So I went down. They used to post nominations on the board outside. And as I walked by, my nomination was on board. I went in. The governor said, oh, I'm so pleased, Dan. He had known my brother. George would be so proud of you. And I said, well, I am a little young. And he said, oh, yes, but you have years and years of service.
Wow.
Then went back to the hearing. Public radio announced that I had been appointed. And, of course, my wife hadn't heard anything about that. And my partners in the law firm hadn't heard it. What the heck is this?
That's a big surprise to everybody.
That was the planning that went into my...
Wow.
But it was the best decision I ever made because the financial part worked out fine.
Yeah.
To go on the Supreme Court wasn't a whole lot different. I was working... I'd been a Superior Court judge for about 4 years. And I was beginning to think, I'm not sure I want to do this for the rest of my life.
No, were you still practicing any law on the side at that point?
You can't. No,
you can't. Okay.
Yeah, once you're a judge, you give it up. So I thought, I'm not sure I want to do this, forever, but we'll see. One day, out of the blue, I get a call from Governor Brennan. He said, we're appointing some judges to the Supreme Court. Would you be interested in being on the Supreme Court? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, fine, come on over and we'll do a press release. So,
things were done a little different in the old days, weren't they?
Yeah. So
now, how long were you on the Supreme Court before the choice
10,
was made to appoint you Chief Justice?
10 years.
And who was Chief Justice,
Chief Justice
at the time?
Vincent McCusick. Yeah. He was appointed Chief Justice the same day that I was appointed to the Superior Court. Yeah, so then Governor Brennan put me on the Supreme Court, and I was there for about 10 years. I attended a master's program at Virginia Law School about that time. It was 3 summers. This was a time when I was, returned to academic life, sort of like revisiting law school. And it was a great experience. It got me thinking about, what do I want to do? I'm not sure I want to do this, what I'm doing for the rest of my life. So I thought, well, I think I'll hang around and see if I might become Chief Justice, because I would like to do that. Governor McKernan, when the vacancy occurred, I got a call from him.
Now, how did that happen? Did Vince McCusick, you said, did he step down? Did he pass away? He retired.
He retired.
Okay. Had you mentioned to anybody you were interested in Chief Justice?
Yeah, I had mentioned to Sam Collins, who had previously been in the Senate with Susan Collins' uncle.
Okay.
He was politically involved. And I had mentioned to him that I was interested in. He was on the court with me at that time. He was the only one, and I would suspect he might have even said something to McKernan. But actually, I didn't get a call from McKernan until after the decision was made. Strange the way these things happen. I got a call one night from a newspaper reporter, and he said, there's a rumor that Governor McKernan is considering appointing you as Chief Justice. Do you have any comment on that? And I said, no, I have no comment. Then I went to get my hair cut. Duke said, are you going to become Chief Justice? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I think your chances are pretty good. And I thought, I think Duke cuts Governor McKernan's hair.
Duke cut a lot of people's hair.
Yeah. I guess and then I eventually got a call.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was a done deal. So it wasn't a lot of planning that went into any of that. The Chief Justice thing came along just at the right time, because even though you continue to do the same court work that I'd done for 10 years, the administrative side of it was a brand new world. And so I was off and running for another 10 years.
And then that brings us to 2001.
Right.
So what prompted that decision to step down and run for governor for 7 weeks?
Well, that's a good question. By that time, I had sort of done everything that I thought I could do as Chief Justice.
How old were you at that point, 2001?
61.
Yep.
61.
Okay.
Well, probably close to 62. I had done everything in practice that I probably was ever going to do. I was just going to do more of it, and to some extent, that was the same thing.
You were ready for the next challenge.
I was ready. Looking around for something. The only thing I could ever think of is I'd like to be the conductor of a symphony orchestra, but I don't have any musical skills. So.
You don't play any instrument?
No. So
I bet they'd let you now if you really wanted to.
So I thought, it's time to move on. And one of the things that I had really enjoyed about being Chief Justice was the opportunity to interact with the other branches of government.
Sure.
To have a relationship with the governor and have a relationship with the legislature and to appear before the Appropriations Committee and the State of the Judiciary speech and all that. That was what I really liked. So I thought that would be it. Even though I had said to myself, the only way I could ever become governor would be by acclamation, because I couldn't run. I know I can't. I couldn't sell magazines in high school because I wouldn't ask anybody would you want to buy a magazine?
I wasn't a very good salesperson.
I couldn't
either.
hardly sell one to my mother, I knew that I couldn't do that, but somehow I became convinced, and this was all sort of interior. As I say, this was the only time I ever planned anything. And as I look back on it, I never regretted that I got done on the court, because I was ready to move on. But
Sure.
It was a mistake to do it. And as I look back on it, I think that 9/11 actually had some influence on me. I did this about 10 days after that. And I was thinking, this is a really difficult time. I don't know that I've ever revealed this, but I was thinking Maine, and it was a difficult time financially for the state. And I thought Maine needs to make some tough decisions. I'm not going to tell anybody this, but I would run for a governor and do one term and not be concerned about getting reelected. And maybe I'm the right guy for that. And then I discovered, well, maybe I might be the right guy for that, but I'm not the right guy to run for office. It's very hard to be authentic. You can't really say what you're thinking. And as I later learned, politicians don't think out loud, which I do. I only was involved for like 7 weeks.
Right.
And I said, I'm out of this, even though things were going well. But I just couldn't stand it.
Who was on your team?
Leon Gorman. Not a bad way to begin.
That's not a bad way to begin at all.
Yeah.
Was there anybody else who were, how did that go? I mean, you were only running for 7 weeks.
Yeah.
You had Leon Gorman.
I had
a pretty good choice,
a bunch of other people that signed up, and I can't remember them now, who was involved. But
that's okay. What was the deciding factor that made you say, yeah, I'm not going to do this?
Well, I guess it was just a series. I didn't like raising money, even though I had raised in the 7 weeks, I'd raised a bunch of money, but it was all just because friends were giving it to me. I wasn't really asking. So I was getting up to the stage where I was actually going to have to start doing some asking.
Fundraising.
Yeah, fundraising and calling people. And I would rather take a beating than sit down and call people on the telephone.
I
and
completely
say,
agree.
And I don't know that I did a whole lot of it. I can't remember that I did. The other thing was that as I was going around, my instinct, when I would meet people, my instinct was I knew what they would like me to say, but I didn't agree with it. For example, there was a large hue and cry about DHHS was too aggressive in child protection proceedings at that time, which I didn't really agree with. There was a lot of people were talking about voter fraud, which I didn't really agree with.
Which they're still talking about
today. They're still talking about it today. My instinct told me I know what to say to make these people happy, but I can't say it. And so I would wind up sort of fudging something, and like if they said, what are your views on gun control? Rather than actually saying what my views were on gun control, I would say, well, I'm, proud that Maine has a very strong protection against gun control. It's sort of...
Sure.
Yeah, and it just wasn't me.
It's hard when you're used to being a straight shooter to try to be diplomatic, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Going back to being a lawyer and judge and all that, what was your favorite part about being a judge? Whether it was the Superior Court or the Supreme Court, what was your favorite part of that?
It was different at different stages. But my favorite part as a trial judge was working with juries and conducting serious trials with juries. I enjoyed that, and I liked the fact that, that it was the jury that made the decision, and I helped them, and I, so on and so forth. That was good. When I was on the Supreme Court before I was Chief Justice, my favorite part would be where one of my colleagues would write an opinion that would be circulated around. Most people would agree with it, and then I would write a dissent, and most people would change. I mean, that didn't happen often, but that was sort of the height of
it definitely makes you feel good.
Success. I mean, okay, I've turned this case right around, and now I have everybody agreeing with me. I enjoyed the academic part of it. The law court Supreme Court is sort of like going back to law school. I mean, it's all briefs and research and writing and, and so on and so forth. I enjoyed that. And then as Chief Justice, my favorite part of it was the interaction with the rest of state government. I eventually got so that the State of the Judiciary address, I could outline 3 initiatives, and I usually would get them accomplished within that year. So it was sort of a trial experience.
Yep. What was the most surprising case that you ever were involved with? Whether it was as a lawyer or a judge or something that surprised you. I mean, you see it in movies all the time where, somebody's being, on the stand and somebody else is being accused, and all of a sudden they say, it was me, I did it.
Yeah.
Everybody goes,
it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Exactly.
The Perry Mason moment.
Exactly. And it doesn't normally happen.
I had a lot of them where it would have been a welcome relief if it had, but it didn't happen, no. Well, I'm sure that there were cases where I won that I didn't think that I would win. I know there were. And then there were cases where I lost, and I thought there's no way in the world I could lose this case.
I can't think of any that stand out.
No, none that really stand out as being. I mean, I tried a ton of cases. I used to try about 25 cases a year, which in today's world would be astronomical. But and then as a judge, I tried a lot of the cases and thousands of opinions and so on and so forth.
Were there any cases where you found yourself surprisingly, personally, or not personally, but really tugged on your heartstrings where you didn't expect?
Oh, yeah. It happened to me more as a trial judge. I mean, you try to, and usually you are without any problem. You accept the result of the jury, and even sometimes when they come out different than what you thought they might, as you reflect on it, you think, well, I think they may have actually, they saw something there that I didn't see, and I think they may actually be right. But the juries at that time were reluctant, some juries were reluctant to find people guilty in rape cases. The only two cases where I thought the jury was completely off the rails were two rape cases. I remember the first time it happened, I was down in York County, and it was about 11 o'clock at night when the jury came in. And when they said not guilty, I was so struck. I excused them and thanked them and did the right thing, but I was so mad at the result, which had never happened to me before. A year or so later in Bangor, one was virtually the same. I just couldn't believe it. I happened to bump into the young girl out in the hall, and I shouldn't have done it, but I said, well, the jury may not have believed you, but I believed you. And these were both vicious cases. But the juries, surprisingly enough, both of those, the first one, there were 11 women and one man. Women are critical of other women. I mean, they sort of, she shouldn't have been there, you know. I wouldn't be in that situation. But that happened in rape cases. Otherwise, I always thought juries did the right thing.
Moving on to Pierce Atwood, which is where you are now.
Right.
You do a lot of trial judge work now, correct?
Well,
or mostly mediation.
Arbitrations are really judging without a robe.
Sure.
But, yeah. I've done arbitrations and mediations ever since my retirement from the political world. And then throughout this period of time, I've also been the court master on the Amhi consent decree, which is sort of a bit of judging. And it's a freer environment. Yeah. I can wander around and talk to people on both sides and that sort of thing. But it's essentially mediation and arbitration. So, what's
been your favorite part about, I don't want to say retired because you're probably busier now, but what's been your favorite part about being part of Pierce Atwood?
The arbitration, well, it's great to be at Pierce Atwood because there's a lot of people here and a lot of very talented lawyers who I occasionally would work with. I did a fair amount of work with Bill Keada before he left and became a federal circuit court judge. And that was a lot of fun. That was just sort of a consulting role, you know, that I wasn't responsible for it. But in my own work, since I've been with the firm, the thing that I've enjoyed most is the arbitrations that I've done. And I've done most of my work, a lot of it outside of the state, a lot of it in Puerto Rico, which is nice in the wintertime, at least until they had the hurricane recently.
Yes.
And it was fun. You get a lot of business cases, large business cases. You usually work in panels of 3 judges. The panels that I was on often would include 2 other people who had been chief justices of other states that I had known in the chief justice days. So I got a chance to work with people who I knew but were from a totally different state system. So those were really interesting cases. And,
is there like a, Chief Justice Club of the United States? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, there is a conference of chief justices.
I was wondering about that.
That's not what leads to this work. It just happens that a lot of judges go on, do arbitrations when they retire. And so you get on the panel of the American Arbitration Association, and then they select you. And they have a tendency to select former judges because they know that they're experienced at deciding cases. It's a lot of fun to work with judges who you've known socially but never worked with.
Yep.
And one really big case that I was involved in, I had the former Chief Justice of Florida and the former Chief Justice of Georgia working with me.
We'll move on to kind of current life a little bit.
Right.
Just a few questions. You still married?
Oh, yes.
Same lady?
The same lady, yeah. I often say
she's put up with you.
When I was in high school, I was interested in only girls and motorcycles. And today, not much has changed. I do have a different motorcycle, but I have the same girlfriend.
Same girlfriend.
Yeah. So
that's nice.
Yeah, we've been married 58 years, and so far it's not bad, really. So far it's okay.
So far.
I'm not.
How many kids do you have?
2.
Grandkids?
4.
It's probably more than enough to keep you busy.
Yeah.
And you live here in Augusta.
Right.
So what do you do in your spare time? Other than motorcycles?
Yeah, motorcycling is one of them. I'm currently trying to sort of phase out of practice someday. I'm not doing hardly any mediations and arbitrations. I need to finish up the mental health work with the courtmaster thing, and I've got a couple of other things that I do. So I do have more spare time than I ever had. I did a fair amount of work with the Augusta Food Bank and getting a new building, and I actually now I'm not on the board or anything, but I pick up groceries Monday morning every week. I motorcycle in the summertime. With Gary Crocker, mostly. And friends of mine from Puerto Rico that come up, and we go down there and that sort of thing. I do a lot of fishing, not a lot, but I go on 2 or 3 or 4 trips this summer, and I do some bird hunting.
Hunting as in with a gun, not just with a pair of binoculars.
Yeah, bird hunting. I don't hunt deer and that sort of thing because I don't eat them, but I do hunt partridge and woodcock, and I've gone out west and hunted pheasants and that sort of thing.
What would your friends say about you?
I don't know. I've reached the age where most of my friends are gone. So it's whittled down. The only friend I can think of is Gary Crocker. And Lord only knows what he would say about me. But
I just have a couple of last questions, and then I have a list of questions that I ask at the very end. Yeah. So, what are the most important lessons that you've learned in life?
It's a tough question. I think, when I've told my life story, particularly my troubled academic beginnings, I've often used the expression that your past is not your future. When I'm talking to young students, don't worry where you are, And I think that's, don't give up on yourself, You're never sure what's going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what are you proudest of in your life?
My kids. I think, no matter what you do, your greatest accomplishment are your children. I once gave an award to Alexander Haig, Patriots Award, down at Knox Museum. I was recounting his accomplishments, and he had 8 grandchildren, I think. And I said, he's been this, that, the other thing. He'd been everything in the world. And I said, but I'm sure that his proudest accomplishment is his 8 grandchildren. He stood up and he said, you're absolutely right. As a grandfather, I knew that would be the case. Yeah.
Now, do either of your kids practice law?
No.
Does that please you or disappoint you?
It doesn't really one way or the other. Neither one of them had any interest in it. Yep. They're both teachers. My son was in business for a while, sold the business. My daughter's a music teacher. My grandchildren, none of them are practicing law or gone into that. My youngest grandson, I tried to influence in that direction, but I was unsuccessful so far. He just graduated from college a year or so ago. So,
any great-grandchildren on the way?
No. Although it would be possible. So my oldest grandson is 29 or so. So it could be. Maybe. Still hope. His grandmother would like him to get with it. I bet she would.
What lessons have you learned from the relationships in your life, with the friendships you've had?
The one thing that I feel pretty grateful for is because of my career, the opportunities that I've been given, I really have some relationships with really good people. I mentioned Leon Gorman. I hunted with him and I fished with him. He's just the greatest guy in the world, And I've got a lot of people in that same category who I never would have met if I hadn't been involved in a public life. I guess the lesson is to treat people as you meet, treat them well and develop a relationship with them. Next to your family, that's really the most important thing.
And if this were to be our very last conversation, what words of wisdom would you want to pass on? I asked some hard questions.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I guess looking back at my career is that if you see something that you think you might want to do, go for it. Don't spend too much time wringing your hands over it one way or the other. If it's right, it's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a list of questions that I always ask at the end. Answer them right off the cuff. Okay. What is your favorite word?
Spent my life writing and talking. I don't think I have a favorite word.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have a least favorite word? I would say that's a yes.
Well, it's not something that I would want to say.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an expression that I really don't like. I'm not a prude. My language is coarse at times, but I don't like the one that you hear people talking about. Something sucks. That just offends me. I don't
Interesting.
Like it. Yeah, I don't like that. And I mean, I can say some things that would make that seem pale, but that one doesn't. Yep. I don't like.
I had a teacher in school that didn't like the word fart. That was her. Yeah, she hated that.
Yeah.
What sound do you love?
Singing, like my daughter's singing.
What sound do you hate?
Scratching fingernails on a blackboard. which they used to do in school. God, it make
Yes.
make me shimmer just to think of it.
What is your favorite curse word?
Probably. I have quite a few. So.
We'll just go with that one.
Yeah.
Okay. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
If I had the skills, I would like to be a conductor of a symphonic orchestra. I
wondered about that.
Yeah, I once did that as where the Portland Symphony, they auctioned off an opportunity to direct it.
Oh, wow.
I had just finished a big trial. I was young. I won the auction and I did it, which was a joke, but it was actually,
You had fun.
This is kind of a good deal. I wish I knew how to do this.
That's nice.
Yeah.
What profession would you not like to do?
Well, I don't know that I would not like to do it. I would like to be able to do it. I wouldn't be particularly good at helping people with serious mental illness or developmental disabilities, even though I admire people who can do that.
Takes a special person.
It takes a special person, and I'm not it. I think I have to confess, I really don't have the compassion that is needed to do that.
Yep.
I can talk game, but I can't really do it. Yeah.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you show up at the pearly gates?
Here's the rest of your family.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chief Justice, I very much appreciate this, and I hope you've had as good a time as I have.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Welcome home to Maine.
This podcast was created and edited by Scott Malevsky. Thanks to our guest this week, and a special thanks to Ellis Paul for the use of his song, Welcome Home to Maine. You can find his CDs, music, and touring schedule at ellispaul.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and iTunes. For more content and bios, visit www.interviewswithme.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you join us next time.